A scorched noon sky over Dustmere. Townsfolk crowd the street, snickering as Clara Avery, the quiet schoolmistress, slides a thin silver ring onto the trembling hand of Red Callahan, an outlaw coughing crimson into a kerchief. The preacher. Falters Red might drop dead mid-vow, yet Clara smiles like she can already see something they can't, far off. A lone rider watches from a ridge, wind tugging his coat. The church bell tolls once, twice. Then Red whispers, "My brother will settle my debts." The bell stops on the third clang gunshot sharp, and the camera smash cuts to black, a brazen sun beat down on Dustmere's lone dirt avenue. Bleaching. Every storefront and hitching post until the world looked scorched flat. Heat shimmered above wagon ruts. Flies lingered on the preacher's black coat. In that glare, Clara Avery stepped from the church doorway in a gown borrowed from the undertaker's widow lace yellowed at the hems, bustle cinched too tight across her ribs. Townsfolk lined the boardwalk rails as though attending a circus. A rancher spat tobacco and whispered, "She be a widow by supper." A girl no older than 8 giggled behind her parasol. Clara kept her chin high, her fingers steady on the wilting bouquet of prairie lilac, and waited while 2 drunks hauled her groom across the dust. Red Callahan lived up to his outlaw legend only in nickname now. Once hardy shoulders sagged like torn canvas. Each hobbled step left a boot print darker than the last, where he'd coughed blood onto the ground. He refused the help, shrugged the men off with a glare, and tottered to Clara's side under his own power. A crimson-stained handkerchief fluttered from his vest pocket, a private banner signaling that time was short. When Red clasped her gloved hand, the crowd's laughter trebled. Clara felt their ridicule scrape along her spine, yet found almost to her surprise that it no longer hurt. At the altar's edge, Red leaned close, breath metallic, voice ragged. "Let's hurry, darlin'. Got promises to keep." The preacher cleared his throat, pages of his Bible crackling like dry leaves. Vows were spoken in clipped phrases, to cherish, to honor, till death. By the second clause, Red's knees buckled. Clara slipped her arm under his, bracing him so. The preacher wouldn't stop. A bead of sweat rolled from her hairline, catching sunlight like a tear she refused to shed. When she slid a thin silver ring purchased that dawn from the pawnshop for a dollop of milk money onto Red's trembling finger, a hush fell. Red's eyes flashed iron-gray determination. "I've a cache of coin buried yonder in Ravenspine ravine," he said loud enough for every eavesdropper. "With it I'll pay your late father's debt and twice again." He coughed hard into the kerchief, pulled it away glossy red, then tucked it back. "If I don't make the delivery," he rasped, "my brother will." Ripples of curiosity ran through the onlookers, but Red's gaze never left Clara's. The preacher pronounced them man and wife. A single ragged cheer rose, half mocking, half astonished. Red swayed. Clara slipped her shoulder beneath his arm, surprising even herself with the ease of it, as though she had carried dying men all her life. They signed the registry on a barrel top because Red could not manage the church steps. Ink smeared around his shaky capital C dot while townspeople drifted off, some to gossip, others to wager on how many sunsets Red had left Clara watch the hotel saloon doors swing shut behind. A gaggle of men still laughing. Their mirth, once knives, felt suddenly distant, dulled by a steady swell of resolve inside her chest. She thought of the unpaid mortgage on her father's ranch, of bank notices shredded and hidden from prying neighbors. Marrying a condemned man meant scandal, but scandal was cheaper than foreclosure, and she'd already been paying with her pride for years. In Red's fevered eyes she'd glimpsed the desperate courage of a cornered Volf. He'd steal time if he couldn't buy it. Something in that feral spark matched the ember in her that refused to let Dustmere bury another Avery without a fight. "They think I'm naive," she mused while guiding Red toward the waiting wagon, "but every choice in Dustmere is a gamble. Mine just happens to be public." Wind tugged at loose strands of her hair, sweat and dust glued lace to her skin. She sensed eyes in every curtained window, yet the scrutiny felt weightless compared to the sight of Red's blood on her sleeve. She told herself she would not fail him because saving him, even for a breath longer, might save the land her father loved. And if Red's map led to nothing, she'd at least have bartered her reputation for a chance, which was more than Dustmere had ever offered her for free. The town bell above the courthouse struck once, signaling the hour. Its tone rang hollow across the flats, reverberating through timber facades. On the second peal, Clara felt Red stiffen beside her. His gaze drifted beyond the rooftops toward the sandstone ridge that framed Dustmere's western edge. She followed his stare. A distant silhouette perched astride a dark horse, coattails streaming in the dry wind. Whoever he was, he sat preternaturally. Still, as though carved from the butte itself, the bell tolled a third time, except the sound no longer seemed bronze. It clanged like iron-shod hoofs pounding earth, a warning gallop heard before the rider moved. Red's grip tightened painfully. "That'll be Colt," he whispered, voice a gravel scrape. "Tellin' the wind he's come." Clara's pulse hammered. The stories about Colt Callahan, elder brother, sharpshooter, unforgiving keeper of family debts, were campfire tales meant to hush reckless boys. Yet the shape on the ridge felt too real, too weighted with intent. She imagined the townsfolk, scattering if they recognized him. Or perhaps they would stay to watch, hoping tragedy might spice their afternoon tea. Red exhaled a wet rattle. Black flecks speckled his lips. Clara steadied him, eyes still fixed on the distant rider. The sun slid, and for an instant the figure was swallowed by glare gone, then reappeared lower on the slope, now undeniably moving toward Dustmere with the slow inevitability of a storm front. Clara swallowed hard, tasting copper on the dry air. She hitched the wagon's reins, helped Red onto the seat, and climbed beside him. The borrowed lace tore at the knee, exposing dusty skin, but modesty had long since lost rank to necessity. She flicked the reins, the horse started. Spectators. Potted curiosity sharpening into whispered speculation. Clara did not look back as they rattled east toward her ranch. The bell's echo faded, replaced by the increasing rhythm of hoofbeats somewhere behind the ridgeline. Each dull thud fused with the last, like an enormous second heartbeat shadowing her own. She pressed her free hand over Red's as he clutched his side, hoping he could not feel the tremor in her fingers. "You're not afraid?" he murmured, eyes half shut. "I already was," she said, surprising them both with the calm in her voice. "Now I'm just busy." Dust rose in a gossamer trail behind the wheels. Ahead, heat haze turned the plain into a wavering sea. Behind, somewhere beyond the ridges, Colt Callahan rode closing distance between laughter and reckoning, between a borrowed wedding gown and whatever tomorrow would dare to look like. Night settled over the plains like a thick wool blanket, stifling and still. The old shack at the edge of Clara's ranch groaned under its own weight, wind slithering through chinks in the siding like a whisper that wouldn't quite hush. Inside, by the glow of a single oil lamp, Red Callahan tossed in fevered sleep on a cot too short for his long frame. Sweat soaked through the sheets and made the splintered floor glisten beneath him. Clara sat beside him with her knees drawn up, reading aloud from a cracked leather Bible, the same one her father used to steady his shaking hands before each drought. "The Lord is my shepherd," she whispered, fingers tracing the page more. Then her eyes. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow." Red stirred, murmuring something broken and indecipherable. Clara dipped a cloth into the basin and pressed it to his brow. The fever came in waves, now hot as a branding iron, then cold as creekbed stone. She'd memorized the rhythm, Red gasping, swearing, whispering names of men long dead. She held his hand through it all. It was the only honeymoon they'd ever have. In a house built by splinters and silence, out past the candlelight, coyotes yipped at the moon. Each cry made her glance at the shotgun propped by the door. By morning, the town's affection had curdled. At the general store, Clara asked for flour on credit and got nothing but a stare. The clerk eyed the gold band on her finger like it was a roach crawling across his counter. "No charity for the outlaw's widow," he said, even though Red still breathed. At the post office, 2 boys mocked her in sing-song. "Kissed a corpse and called it love." A handbill fluttered on a nearby pole, her own likeness drawn poorly beneath the title. "Outlaw Bride." Someone had sketched flies buzzing around her head. The bank teller, who used to compliment her handwriting, now spoke in clipped sentences, and slid her receipts with 2 fingers like she might burn him if touched. She stopped walking through town, stopped lifting her chin, started loading the shotgun even when it felt ridiculous. Dustmere wasn't content to wait for Red to die. It was doing everything short of digging the grave itself. That night, Clara found Red awake and sitting up, a pillow wedged between his spine and the warped wall. Candlelight caught the hollows of his cheeks and made the sweat on his temples look like frost. His breath came slow and raspy, but his eyes, those same gray eyes that once held gun-needle fire, were clear. "I drew something for you," he said, voice like a gravel road. She knelt beside him, and he unfolded a torn feed sack with lines scratched in charcoal crooked ridges, an X and 3 notches labeled in handwriting just steady enough to read. Clara blinked. "This is Ravenspine?" He nodded. "Past Dead Horse Bluff, behind the petroglyph wall, there's a hollow. I stashed it there before the U.S. Marshal put a price on my spine." He gave her a sideways look. "Half in silver coins, other halves in gold, buried deep." Clara stared at the crude drawing. She'd heard of Ravenspine. Every rancher had, but few dared it. Rattlesnakes, steep drops, outlaws who didn't care about wanted posters. It was a place folks didn't return from. Red reached out and curled her fingers around the map. "If Colt rides in—" He stopped, coughed, a long, gurgling sound that ended with him spitting dark blood into a cracked bowl. "You run," he finished, barely above a whisper. "Don't look back." She could only nod. Her throat had closed too tight to speak. "They left just before dawn, the sky painted in bruises indigo and violet pressed thin against a flat horizon." Clara bundled Red in his old trail coat, tucked the map into her bodice, and propped him onto the saddle like a scarecrow coming to life. His legs barely held. His hands were rope-burned from gripping the horn. She tied the reins to her own saddle and led the way as the wind kicked dust across the open flats. They passed fence posts she hadn't had time to mend, a trough where her father once taught her to float sticks and guess which one would win the race downstream. She didn't look back at the house. By midday, the plains blurred into sand and stone. The sun boiled overhead. Heat waves warped the canyon walls. Clara shaded her eyes and studied the route. Ravenspine was close, but time wasn't. Red's head lolled forward with every bump. He murmured nonsense words, each syllable a ghost. A sudden gust swept through the ravine mouth, bringing with it a gust of grit and an acrid tang like something dead long ago. Red's horse spooked. He didn't react. "Red?" she asked, pulling up beside him. His chin rested on his chest. Blood seeped through the front of his coat, not fresh, not gushing, just there. Tired blood. Old Clara dismounted, reaching up to steady him, but his body slumped forward like a marionette with its strings cut. She caught him halfway, her shoulder pressed to his ribs, the heat of him leaking away. "Red, no, don't." His eyelids fluttered. "Still here," he rasped. "Just restin'." She laid him down on a flat rock at the ravine's edge, the map clenched between her fingers like it might vanish if she let go. Around them, the earth stretched out in jagged slabs and wind-chiseled bones. Somewhere ahead, beneath the rocks and snakes and sand, the treasure waited, but Clara didn't move yet. She sat beside the man who gave her one last wild gamble and ran her hand through his hair. He shivered once. Then still behind them, from somewhere deep in the canyon's throat, came the low echo of hoofbeats, slow, deliberate, drawing closer. 2 days after the wedding, the Double Star Saloon seemed to breathe whiskey fumes and suspicion. At high noon, its swinging doors flapped wide, letting in a slice of blinding light and a man who carried shadow like a second skin. Colt Callahan filled the doorway, broad-shouldered, coat as black as lamp soot, revolver hilt glinting near his hip. He did not speak when the piano faltered or when the card players froze mid-deal. He simply walked to the bar with the cats. Unhurried grace, boots thudding once on the polished plank floor. Bartender Wilkes swallowed hard, expecting bourbon orders or blood. Colt removed his hat, set it brim down. "Glass of milk," he said, voice flat as the desert. The request landed like a pistol misfire. A nervous laugh flickered at the poker table, died fast. Wilkes poured from the breakfast jug, hands trembling. Colt drank half in one swallow, pale mustache of cream on his upper lip, and surveyed the room with eyes that measured distance, too. Every exit, no one dared match his gaze for long. When he set the glass down, the bar's scarred surface quivered as though grateful he hadn't used it for a bullet rest. He asked only one question. Where'd they take my brother's bride? Dustmere answered with silence because Dustmere loved a show. The show arrived that evening in the form of a funeral lacking a corpse. The town bell clanged to townsfolk. Gathered round a pine box stuffed with sandbags, and the preacher muttered scripture over nothing at all. They nailed the lid shut any way symbolism pleased them, and traded rumors that Red Callahan had died on Clara's ranch, that she'd already pawned his silver tooth for liquor, that maybe she'd poisoned him to rush the inheritance. Oh. The while Colt leaned against the hitch rail, arms folded, expression carved from tundra basalt. Wind lifted the tails of his duster like a black flag of mourning none dared salute. Children who had chanted nursery rhymes 2 days earlier now fell mute beneath his stare. When the preacher pronounced ashes to ashes, Colt spoke for the first time since leaving the saloon. Where? One word, low and heavy. Everyone understood the missing sentence. Tell me or bleed. The blacksmith coughed and pointed east. Ravenspine ravine. She took him at dawn. Colt tipped a phantom hat to the fresh casket, mounted a coal-dark mare, and rode out as the first shovelful of dirt hit hollow pine. Cold twilight had already swallowed most of the ravine by the time. Clara wedged her shoulder beneath Red's arm and heaved him through a cleft in the canyon wall. His boots dragged furrows in red dust. Each ragged breath sounded like paper tearing. The lamp she carried tossed their shadows 30 feet high across, petroglyphs, ancient spirals, and hunter figures writhing under orange flame with every step. Red's weight increased, as if something invisible tugged him earthward. Almost there, she whispered, not sure whether she lied. The map said to follow the narrow slit until it widened into a chamber shaped like a Volf's mouth. Silver bars hid beneath flat stones near the back. She could smell damp minerals already, metallic and cold, promise layered over rot. A gust funneled through the passage, killing the lamp for half a heartbeat. In that brief dark Clara heard hoofbeats echo along the outer gorge, slow, deliberate, too rhythmic for wild mustangs. When the light flared again, Red's face looked carved from driftwood, eyes glassy. He tried to lift his revolver but lacked the strength. It clattered, discharged a single dull click instead of thunder. They reached the cavern mouth, at last a gullet of stone yawning before them. Clara lowered him against a boulder, pried up floor slabs with a rust-patched pickaxe, fingers screaming from effort. First stone slid free, then second, revealing stacked ingots dulled by sand yet unmistakably precious. She almost wept at the sight. The ranch was saved 10 times over if she survived the night. Boots scraped behind her. She spun, lamp stretched forward. Colt stood framed in the passage, rifle resting across one forearm. The lamplight painted silver ribbons in his dark hair and caught a faint smile, no warmer than frost. He took in the open cache, the fallen brother, the frantic bride in torn lace, and let the silence coil. Easy now, he said, voice calm enough to soothe rattlers. I ain't here to hurt a widow. He stepped closer, rifle never quite. Aimed yet never harmless. Trade, Miss Avery. Treasure for your life and the Callahan name released. Walk away free. Clara's pulse drummed so loud she feared Red might hear it failing. This treasure pays my father's debt. Without it the bank. He cut her off with a small gesture. Bank don't matter dead. His gaze flitted. To Red, who forced one eye open. Howdy, brother. Red managed a cough that almost sounded like laughter. Told her you'd come, he rasped. Told her you don't bluff. Never have. Colt's boots advanced another pace, crunching grit. 1 wagon's worth of silver's more than fair for a week-old marriage. Clara brandished the pickaxe like a halberd, but her arms quivered. You'll carry him out first, she said, or you leave with nothing. Colt tilted his head, evaluating the courage it took to issue terms while trembling. He lowered the rifle muzzle an inch in acknowledgement, yet behind the courtesy flickered calculation. "He's dying already, ma'am. Iron's kinder than fever." He pointed 2 fingers at the ingots. "Stack those onto my saddle and I ride out alone. You stay with him if you wish." "No bullets tonight," Red's voice roughened to a growl. "Don't listen. He'll shoot you after." Colt's smile returned, thin, wistful. Brother never could keep faith. He planted the rifles but on the floor, thumb stroking the hammer out of habit. "Clock's ticking, Mrs. Callahan." Clara's throat burned with sand and outrage. She glanced from Colt's impassive face to Red's ashen one, then to the silver gleaming like captured moonlight at her feet. She felt every tick of her heartbeat split open a new branch of terror. Choose fortune and risk murder, refuse and guarantee ruin. Outside, wind howled through the slit canyon, carrying dust and a rising hint of rain nature holding its breath. For the outcome. Red pushed up on one elbow with strength mined from someplace pain had not yet conquered. He met Colt's gaze and whispered, "Blood means debt, brother, not silver." Colt's eyes flickered faint recognition, maybe regret, but his gun hand tightened. Clara saw the decision harden in his stance and knew words would buy no more time. She stepped between the brothers, lifted Red's fallen revolver with both hands, and cocked it. The sound echoed like a judge's gavel across the petroglyph walls. Colt's brows lifted, admiration twinned with warning. "Careful," he said. Softly, "Pull that trigger and debts multiply." She steadied her aim, spine straight despite the weight of the gun. "Then let's start counting," she replied. Wind howled through Skull Bridge's hemp slats, turning each plank into a throat that moaned over the abyss. Lightning stitched ragged seams above the chasm, its pulse reflecting in Clara's eyes as she edged backward, guiding Red onto the swaying span. One hand clutched his coat collar. The other held his revolver so tight the checkered grip bit crescents into her palm. 30 feet below, black water snarled around boulders like it wanted fresh meat. Halfway across, the bridge sagged, ropes creaking with every tremor of distant thunder. Red wheezed behind her, breath catching on a rattle that sounded closer to farewell than life. Then Colt stepped onto the entrance plank, dark coat thrashing in the wind, rifle barrel glimmering, whenever lightning showed the whites of his narrowed eyes. He advanced with deliberate calm, weight testing each board as though the chasm were no more troublesome than saloon floorboards. Between gusts, Clara heard the faintest echo of laughter from the gorge wallstone mirage of those townsfolk who had once mocked her vows, and the thought steeled her spine. She raised Red's gun, arms trembling yet straight. Rain began in fat, cold coins clinking off wood, off metal, off Red's crooked hat brim. The bridge rocked harder. She drew a breath that tasted of ozone and fear. "Half the silver," she shouted over the wind, voice lifting like a banner she could barely hold. "Load it onto your horse, ride out, and let him finish his hour in peace. No blood, Colt?" Her offer hung between forked flashes, absurd yet possible. Colt slowed. Boots spread for balance, gaze sliding to where Red leaned against the fraying side rope. "Peace?" he barked, smile thin. "My brother dragged war everywhere he went." He lowered the rifle, a tease of compliance, then spun it up with a gunfighter's flourish. "All or nothing, Mrs. Callahan. That map and the silver are mine." By right of blood, his thumb cocked the hammer. The click rang louder than thunder. Clara's heart hammered so hard she felt the bridge pulse with it. Rain blurred her vision. She steadied the revolver's front sight on Colt's chest, knowing the recoil would twist her wrists, knowing she might miss, knowing missing would mean dying without finishing a single prayer. Colt's dark eyes flicked to Red, then back to her, calculating angles, wind, love, and foolishness. Lightning erupted white. Colt fired first. The muzzle burst lit his face into a death mask, yet the bullet never reached Clara. Red, finding one last vein of strength, lunged sideways, shoving her hip so the shot sailed past into night. Red's body caught the second ball square in the ribs. The force spun him half around. As Clara screamed, he collapsed against the rope rail, blood flowering instantly through his coat. But his hands kept purpose. He shoved the crumpled map Into her fingers, and with a wild smile soft as dusk, whispered, "That's settled." Another jolt from the storm snapped overhead. The rope rail snapped too. Red pitched backward, clutching the rail and her gaze both. For a breath long enough to break a heart, he hung suspended, crimson droplets sliding upward in his falling wake. Then the rope ripped free and he tumbled coat, hat, and hollow laugh into the roaring dark below. The bridge rebounded, sending Clara to her knees. Colt froze at the sight of his brother vanishing. The steel in his eyes fractured, revealing something raw, almost boyish, before the mask returned. Rain sheeted down, plastering Clara's hair to her cheeks as she rose, sodden lace whipping around her calves. Red's spare revolver, heavy as an iron promise, dangled at her side. With both hands she cocked it and stepped forward until only a yard of trembling planks separated them. "You laughed at our vows?" she said, voice low, ragged, but steadier than the bridge itself. "Your turn to beg." Colt's rifle barrel wavered, then lowered as though burdened by more than weight. Grief flickered again, thicker this time, a fault line opening. He backed one step, then another, retreating toward solid ground. Wind tore at his coat, making it flap like a wounded crow. Clara kept the gun trained until he reached stone and turned away, shoulders bowed under. Rain and memory. Months later, sunlight warmed the porch of the Avery ranch house, its shaky rafters rebuilt with cedar bought outright. A single silver bar propped the screen door open, gleaming beside pots of yellow daisies that Clara watered each dawn. Children passing the lane sometimes paused, ear to the breeze, claiming they heard laughter curling off the canyon, two voices. One rough as gravel, one smooth as riverstone, endlessly arguing the price of debts unpaid. Clara only smiled at the notion, fingers resting on the worn revolver hanging above the lintel, a quiet reminder that some myths are carved in lead, others in love, and both echo long after the shooting stops. The wind blew softer in spring. It carried no ash, no blood, only the rustle of cottonwood leaves and the squeak of a porch swing swaying gently under the weight of one tired woman watching her land hold steady. Clara stood barefoot on the porch. Of the ranch house she had once feared would vanish, her skirt brushing her calves, her hair tied back with a worn ribbon. Where splintered planks once sagged, now stood new cedar boards sturdy. Sun-warmed, smelling of clean sweat and fresh work, dot at the door's edge sat a bar of silver, tarnished slightly with weather but unmistakably heavy. She used it to hold. Open the screen door now, a quiet rebellion against vaults and banks and the way men measured worth. Inside, the radio played low gospel. On the table sat a ledger with no debts, just names of workers paid on time and neighbors repaid in full. Above the doorway hung a revolver she hadn't touched in months. Its holster cracked, but loaded still because some ghosts didn't vanish. They just stopped knocking. Children ran past the fence line, chasing a wind-blown hoop. One stopped. Head cocked and stared out across the distant canyon. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. The others paused. A breeze curved over the mesa and back again, brief and dry, but strange. Not a howl, not a storm, something lighter? Almost like a laugh. "It's just wind," said another, but the first boy shook his head. No, that was talking. Two voices. Clara didn't turn. She kept looking out at the wheat field, arms folded, lips barely curved into something between a smile and a memory. The air was warm. The land was quiet. Somewhere, far beyond the hills, the echoes of brothers still argued beneath the sky.